The cafe was small, with warm lights that glowed softly over the wooden tables. A quiet hum of conversation filled the room, mixed with the occasional clinking of cups and plates. She moved between the tables, carrying orders with practiced ease, smiling politely at customers, and trying to make each person feel welcome. Her day had been long, and her feet ached, but she liked the rhythm of her work. It was simple, ordinary, and steady, the kind of life that let her feel she had some control. It was nearing the late afternoon, and the cafe had begun to empty out. The air smelled faintly of coffee and baked bread, comforting and familiar. She wiped down a table where a small group had just left, straightening the chairs and glancing around. That's when she noticed a group of young people gathered near the corner, near a small upright piano that had always been part of the cafe's charm, but had rarely been used. Most people just passed it by, too shy or too busy to play. But these customers were laughing and looking around with curiosity. One of them leaned forward, catching her attention. They had an easy, friendly way about them that made her pause. Without any introduction, the person asked if she could play a song on the piano. The words surprised her. She had played piano for years, quietly, for herself or small gatherings, but never for strangers, and never in this cafe. She felt a mix of hesitation and curiosity, a flutter of nerves she wasn't used to. Playing in front of people, even a small group, was different. It made her palms a little sweaty and her stomach tighten. The group encouraged her, leaning closer, smiling, assuring her it would be fun. She bit her lip, thinking for a moment. What harm could it do? It was just a small cafe, a few people, a tiny moment in the day. She walked over to the piano, brushing her hands against the polished wood as if testing the surface. The keys were slightly worn, smooth from years of occasional use, and she felt a sense of connection, like she was about to start a conversation without words. Sitting on the piano bench, she took a deep breath, letting her fingers hover over the keys. She closed her eyes for a moment, recalling the many hours she had spent practicing, the quiet evenings when she would lose herself in music after long days. She started with a soft note, a single key, and then another, letting the sound fill the quiet space. It was simple at first, hesitant, like dipping a toe into a cold stream. But then the music began to flow. Her fingers moved with a natural rhythm, the melody gentle and soothing, weaving through the cafe like sunlight through the window. Customers nearby began to notice. Conversation slowed and faded, replaced by the unexpected harmony. The laughter of the small group at the corner softened, replaced by quiet attention. Some people stopped mid-sip, some rested their hands on cups, listening, as if caught in a moment of calm they hadn't expected. She felt her nerves settle with each note. Playing felt like breathing, natural and necessary. Her heart raced with a mix of excitement and fear, but also joy. For the first time in a long while, she was not just serving coffee or wiping tables. She was creating something that touched people. As she played, she felt a strange connection with the people in the room. Some were smiling softly, some had their eyes closed, letting the music wash over them. She noticed an older man tapping his fingers lightly on the table, a young woman bobbing her head gently, and a child leaning forward with wide eyes. She realized that this small act, this choice to play, had transformed the atmosphere. The cafe felt alive in a new way, vibrant and warm. Like the music had opened a door, no one had expected to be there. She didn't stop to think about herself, about whether she was good enough or if anyone would care. She only focused on the sound, letting it rise and fall naturally, like a conversation with invisible friends. A small group in the corner nodded and whispered to each other, clearly impressed, and a few people even quietly recorded on their phones, careful not to interrupt the flow. She noticed it but didn't pause. She wanted the music to continue uninterrupted. Minutes passed, though it felt like only a few breaths. When she finally lifted her hands from the keys, there was a silence, a brief pause where the cafe seemed to hold its breath. Then, slowly, the sounds of life returned, cups, soft murmurs, but there was something different in the air. People were smiling more, lingering longer, and the small group in the corner looked genuinely delighted, almost amazed. She felt a surge of satisfaction, a warmth spreading through her chest, as if she had shared a piece of herself without even meaning to. She stood, brushing her hands together, feeling a little self-conscious, but also proud. The group thanked her, their smiles wide and sincere, and she returned their smiles, feeling a spark of connection she hadn't expected. As she moved back to her duties, carrying plates and taking orders, she noticed that the cafe felt lighter, friendlier, almost charged with the energy of that brief musical interlude. For her, it was a simple act, a small choice. But it had transformed an ordinary day into something extraordinary. Even after the music ended, she caught glimpses of people still talking about it quietly, exchanging glances, smiling. Some whispered to friends who hadn't heard, pointing toward the piano, almost like sharing a secret. She returned to her routine, but with a lighter step, a small smile lingering on her face. That moment reminded her that life could surprise you in the smallest places. And sometimes, courage was just answering a simple request. She didn't know then that this small, ordinary afternoon would soon reach far beyond the cafe walls. But in that moment, she only needed to know that music had created a connection, brief but real, that made everyone in the room pause and feel something special. After the first few notes, she felt a strange warmth spreading through her chest. It was as if the piano was speaking to her, inviting her to play more, to let her hands tell a story that words could not. She hesitated for a moment, thinking about the eyes watching her, but the soft encouragement from the small group in the corner gave her courage. She let her fingers glide across the keys, slowly at first, testing the sound, and with more confidence as the melody began to unfold naturally. Each note seemed to float in the air, gentle and clear, carrying a calm energy that filled the cafe. The people who had been chatting or quietly drinking their coffee began to pause. Conversations stopped mid-sentence, and all attention drifted toward the music. She noticed a man sitting alone near the window, his hands wrapped around his cup, staring at the piano with a soft smile. A few people at other tables put down their phones or books, drawn in by the unexpected beauty of the sound. Even the small group in the corner had grown quiet, leaning forward, eyes bright with curiosity and appreciation. She felt a connection to everyone in the room, though she didn't know their names or their stories. For those few minutes, the music became a bridge, linking strangers in a simple shared experience. She allowed herself to close her eyes for a moment, just listening, feeling the rhythm beneath her fingers. Her mind wandered to the hours she had spent learning the piano, the long evenings when she had practiced alone, sometimes feeling frustrated when her fingers stumbled, sometimes feeling a quiet joy when a melody flowed perfectly. Now, those private moments were blooming in front of people she didn't know, and instead of fear, she felt a thrill, a quiet pride. This was more than playing. It was sharing a part of herself she usually kept hidden. The melody shifted, growing richer and more complex. She began to experiment slightly, letting her emotions guide her hands. The music seemed to respond to her mood, sometimes light and playful, sometimes deep and reflective. People leaned in closer, some tapping their fingers to the rhythm, others simply closing their eyes and letting themselves be carried by the sound. She noticed a little girl at the back, her eyes wide with amazement, her small hands clapping quietly after a few notes, and it made her smile without thinking. The energy in the cafe was changing. The ordinary, mundane atmosphere of the afternoon had transformed into something vibrant and alive. She didn't know how long she had been playing. Time felt suspended, as though the world had paused just to listen. Each note built upon the last, creating a flow that felt effortless, though it was born from years of practice and dedication. She felt her nerves disappear completely, replaced by a sense of freedom. The music allowed her to breathe in a way she hadn't realized she was holding back, to express joy, curiosity, and even a touch of sorrow all at once. It was a release, a quiet celebration of something pure and unspoken. From the corner of her eye, she noticed a few people beginning to record the performance on their phones. She didn't mind. The thought that this moment could reach beyond the cafe, that someone else might hear the music and feel the same sense of wonder, gave her a quiet excitement. She continued to play, letting the melody grow naturally, shifting in tempo and tone, exploring different emotions without any plan or expectation. It was as if the piano had become an extension of herself, responding to the subtle movements of her mind and heart. A couple near the counter exchanged smiles, quietly talking about the unexpected performance. One person in the back seemed to wipe a tear from their eye, moved by the beauty of the music. The small group who had invited her to play now sat entranced, whispering to each other, their faces lighting up with every chord. She felt a deep satisfaction that she had never experienced before in her life as a waitress, a sense of purpose that went beyond serving food or taking orders. For those few minutes, she was not just a worker in a cafe. She was a musician, a storyteller, a person connecting with others in the simplest and most profound way. The music began to take on a gentle crescendo. She could feel the anticipation in the room, the unspoken attention of each listener. She let herself be carried by it, not worrying about mistakes or hesitation, simply moving with the melody. The piano seemed to respond, each note resonating warmly, echoing softly against the walls and ceiling. The cafe felt larger somehow, filled not with tables and chairs, but with sound, with a shared emotion that bound everyone present in a delicate, invisible web. She glanced briefly at the small group in the corner. They were smiling, nodding, clearly amazed. The youngest among them leaned forward with shining eyes, and she felt a surge of emotion, realizing how much simple acts of courage and willingness could impact others. Music had a way of touching hearts, bypassing words and reaching something deeper, and now she understood that firsthand. She felt an almost overwhelming gratitude for being allowed to play, to express herself freely, and to see the effect it had on people. As she continued, her mind wandered to the quiet satisfaction of small achievements in life. Sometimes ordinary moments carried extraordinary potential, moments that could change how people saw the world around them. Today, a simple request to play had opened a door to something unexpected, something joyful and inspiring. She felt a gentle pride in herself, but not the kind that boasted or demanded attention, simply a quiet acknowledgement that she had embraced a moment fully, without fear, and created something beautiful for others. The melody softened, slowing slightly as she approached the natural end. She let the final notes linger, allowing them to hang in the air, touching each listener gently before fading away. For a brief second, there was complete silence, the kind of silence that felt full, alive, and significant. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, people began to breathe out, to move, to return to the rhythm of the cafe. Some whispered to each other, expressing their amazement. Some clapped softly, almost shyly, as if not wanting to break the spell. She stood from the piano, hands resting lightly on the bench, heart still racing, a gentle smile spreading across her face. The small group who had asked her to play leaned forward, their faces bright, thanking her repeatedly. She smiled, feeling a warm glow of happiness. It had been more than a performance. It had been a connection, a shared moment of beauty that would remain in the minds of everyone present. She returned to her work, carrying a quiet confidence and a subtle glow of joy with her. The cafe felt different now, not just a place of coffee and conversation, but a place where unexpected magic could happen, where small moments could turn into memories that lingered. She noticed that some people stayed a little longer, reluctant to leave the warmth of the moment, whispering to friends or tapping their phones to capture the memory. She didn't mind being watched. She understood that the experience had touched them too. As she moved between tables again, taking orders and clearing dishes, she carried the music within her, a quiet hum of satisfaction that kept her spirit light. The ordinary day had transformed, and she knew she would remember this moment for the rest of her life. A reminder that courage, openness, and a willingness to share even a small talent could create something extraordinary. As the music faded and she returned to her routine, she noticed subtle changes in the cafe. People were quieter, yet their eyes lingered on the piano as if expecting something more. The soft chatter that had filled the room earlier was replaced by occasional murmurs of amazement, and a few customers whispered to friends, replaying the moment in their minds. It was as though the atmosphere had shifted from ordinary to something special, alive with a shared energy that was hard to describe. She felt it too, a lingering warmth and satisfaction that refused to leave her. While she served drinks and cleared plates, she noticed that some customers were holding their phones, showing others a video they had recorded. A few even approached her, hesitating slightly, and complimented her playing. Their words were simple but sincere, expressions of surprise and admiration that made her heart flutter. One elderly woman leaned on the counter, smiling and shaking her head, saying she hadn't heard such a beautiful melody in years. A young couple whispered to each other, clearly discussing the performance with excitement. The small group that had invited her to play was still sitting at their table, their faces glowing with delight. Clearly pleased with the way the music had touched everyone. As she moved between tables, she began to notice something unexpected. More customers who had not been present earlier were arriving, drawn in by the whispers and soft excitement. They asked about the piano, about the performance, and some requested that she play again. She felt a mixture of surprise and nervousness. She had only intended to play for a few moments, not imagining it would have such an immediate impact. But the encouragement she felt from the group and the quiet smiles of others gave her courage. She decided to play once more, not for recognition, but because it felt right. Returning to the piano, she allowed herself a deep breath, letting the air calm her nerves. Her fingers hovered above the keys, recalling the melodies that had flowed so naturally before. The moment felt different this time, more aware of the growing audience and the subtle attention that had shifted toward her. Yet, as she pressed the first few notes, that familiar sense of calm and freedom returned. The music began to flow again, smooth and gentle, weaving its way through the cafe and enveloping everyone present. The new audience leaned in, intrigued and delighted. Conversations ceased once more, replaced by attentive listening. She noticed that even those who had been hesitant or distracted before were now fully engaged, captivated by the soft yet powerful expression of music. A man at the back tapped his foot lightly, a small smile forming, while a young girl watched in awe, her hands pressed together. She felt a quiet connection to each person, as though the piano allowed her to speak directly to their hearts, without a single word. As she continued to play, the cafe seemed to breathe with her, the air thick with the emotion and beauty of the moment. She let her fingers explore the keys, improvising slightly, letting intuition guide the melody. The music carried a gentle energy, shifting from playful and light to deep and reflective. Each note had a purpose, each pause a silent conversation with the listeners. She felt a subtle thrill realizing that even without seeing their faces clearly, she could sense their emotions, their engagement, and their appreciation. She glanced briefly at the small group in the corner, who were now leaning closer to each other, clearly discussing how unexpected and wonderful this moment had become. Some were recording on their phones again, careful not to disrupt the flow. She didn't mind, and in fact, it added to her quiet excitement, knowing that what she was creating in that moment might reach others beyond the cafe walls. She let the thought linger for a moment, then set it aside, focusing solely on the music and the connection it created in the present. Minutes passed, and the melody deepened, carrying more emotion than before. She could feel the intensity of the room subtly rising, the energy becoming richer, more vibrant. She noticed tears forming in the eyes of an older man sitting near the window, and she felt a gentle empathy, a shared understanding that music could communicate feelings words could not. Even those who tried to hide their reactions couldn't help but smile, their faces softening, their posture relaxing as the music enveloped them. The simple cafe had transformed into a place of collective emotion, a shared space where strangers could feel connected through the power of sound. As she continued, she allowed herself to become fully absorbed, letting the music dictate her movements. The melody took unexpected turns, rising in gentle crescendos and softening in moments of reflection. She noticed the subtle reactions of the audience, a couple whispering to each other, a child leaning forward with shining eyes, a man tapping his fingers to the rhythm without realizing it. These small responses energized her, giving her a quiet encouragement to explore the piano further, to let her hands express everything she felt in that moment. She realized that something remarkable was happening. What began as a simple request had grown into a shared experience that touched everyone present. It wasn't about applause or recognition. It was about creating a connection, about letting people feel the beauty of music in its purest form. She felt a sense of humility, understanding that the piano had given her the chance to communicate in a way she had never fully appreciated before. Each note she played was more than sound. It was a thread weaving people together, an unspoken bond forming among strangers. As the melody continued, she felt a gentle shift within herself. She understood now that her talent, often kept private and quiet, could reach others in profound ways. She began to notice the small gestures of appreciation around her. A smile, a nod, a tear quietly brushed away. These gestures, subtle but powerful, reinforced the idea that her music had meaning beyond her own experience. It was a shared gift, a simple offering that resonated deeply with those who listened. The music grew softer, winding down naturally, yet leaving a lingering presence in the room. She allowed the final notes to hang in the air, letting them resonate fully before fading into silence. The cafe remained quiet for a moment, as though absorbing the final echoes of the melody. Then, slowly, conversations resumed, soft clapping broke out, and people exchanged smiles and whispered comments. She felt a gentle rush of satisfaction, a quiet pride that did not demand attention, but filled her with warmth and joy. The small group in the corner looked genuinely thrilled, their eyes bright and faces glowing. They expressed their gratitude with simple words, smiles and quiet laughter, clearly moved by what they had just experienced. She returned to her work, carrying the music with her, letting it infuse her steps, her movements, and her interactions. The cafe had changed in subtle ways. It was no longer just a place to eat and drink, but a place where moments of beauty and connection could unfold. Unexpectedly, she noticed that even as she resumed her routine, people were talking quietly about the performance, replaying the experience in their minds. Some checked their phones, watching the videos that had been recorded, sharing them with friends. She felt a gentle sense of wonder, realizing that her music had the power to reach far beyond the immediate moment, to touch others even after they had left the cafe. The thought filled her with quiet excitement, but she remained humble, appreciating the experience for what it was: a brief, meaningful connection created through sound and emotion. As the afternoon moved toward evening, the cafe began to settle into a calm rhythm once again. She continued her work with a lighter step, a quiet smile lingering on her face. The memory of the music, the reactions of the listeners, and the simple joy of playing stayed with her, a subtle reminder that life could surprise in the smallest and most beautiful ways. She understood now that courage and openness, even in tiny moments, could create experiences that were extraordinary and unforgettable, leaving traces of joy in the hearts of those who were lucky enough to witness them. The next day, the cafe felt different. There was a quiet buzz in the air, a sense of anticipation that hadn't been there before. She arrived early, tying her apron and taking a deep breath. Even before she began serving customers, she could feel that her performance the day before had left an impression. A few regulars came in, smiling and nodding as if acknowledging something unspoken, and she returned their gestures with a modest smile. It was strange to feel noticed, not for her work as a waitress, but for something deeper, something she had shared without even thinking about it. As she began her shift, the cafe slowly filled with new faces. Some customers were clearly curious, asking about the piano and the performance they had heard about from friends or social media. She felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement. Yesterday had been unexpected, a spontaneous moment, but today she realized it might be something more, something that could reach further than she had imagined. She focused on her work, serving coffee and breakfast with careful attention. While quietly observing the interest around the room. Mid-morning, a group approached her table, introducing themselves politely and explaining that they had seen the video of her playing online. They wanted to know if she would perform again, perhaps for a small gathering they were organizing. She felt a surge of surprise. The idea that a simple, unplanned performance could attract such attention was both thrilling and intimidating. She hesitated, thinking about the ordinary life she had known, the quiet routine of serving customers, and the unexpected path that music had opened for her. But then she remembered the warmth and connection she had felt yesterday, and without overthinking, she agreed. Returning to the piano, she allowed herself a moment to settle in. Her fingers hovered over the keys, familiar yet alive with anticipation. She played a soft, tentative note, testing the sound and feeling the weight of the moment. The cafe quieted once more, customers pausing mid-conversation, drawn in by the music. As her confidence grew, the melody became richer, flowing naturally, improvising slightly as she followed her intuition. She felt a deep sense of connection, not just to the music, but to the people who were listening, allowing them to experience the emotions she carried through the notes. The group that had requested her performance watched intently, whispering quietly to one another, clearly moved by what they were hearing. She noticed that other customers, even those who had not come for her music, were now paying attention, captivated by the subtle beauty and emotion of each chord. She felt the thrill of sharing something meaningful, of creating a moment that was both personal and collective, intimate yet open to anyone who chose to listen. Every note seemed to carry a piece of her story, a fragment of experience and feeling that resonated with the listeners in ways words could not. After the performance, a few people approached her, thanking her and expressing admiration. Some mentioned that they had shared the video with friends, explaining how unexpected and wonderful it was. She felt a quiet sense of pride, tempered with humility, recognizing that her music had the power to touch others beyond the cafe walls. She returned to her duties, carrying a subtle excitement that infused her work with a lightness she hadn't felt before. The cafe seemed to hum with energy, alive with anticipation and the lingering memory of the performance. Throughout the day, the attention continued to grow. Local media outlets had caught wind of the story, and by mid-afternoon, she received a call from a small community station asking if she would come in for a brief interview. She was nervous, unaccustomed to public attention, but the idea of sharing her music and the story behind it felt meaningful. She agreed, knowing it would be a new step, one that could lead to unexpected opportunities. As she hung up the phone, she took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of anxiety and excitement, aware that her life was beginning to shift in ways she had not imagined. Later, during a quiet moment, she sat at the piano again, fingers lightly brushing the keys. The cafe was calm, a few regulars lingering over coffee. She played a soft, gentle melody, letting the music fill the room without expecting anything in return. It was a moment of reflection, a way to reconnect with herself amidst the growing attention. She realized how much joy she found in the simple act of playing, in the ability to express herself freely and touch others' hearts. The thought that this could become a more permanent part of her life was both exhilarating and daunting. By evening, she had begun to receive invitations to perform at local events, small gatherings, and community functions. Each request was accompanied by a polite note expressing admiration for her talent and the emotional impact of her music. She felt humbled and grateful, recognizing that her life was opening in ways she could never have planned. The idea that something so ordinary, a waitress being asked to play a piano, could create such opportunities was astonishing. She carried herself with quiet confidence, letting the music and the experience guide her decisions rather than fear or doubt. The day ended with a final performance in the cafe, a soft, reflective piece that seemed to mirror the shifting emotions of the day. Customers lingered, listening quietly, some whispering in awe, others smiling at the simple beauty of the music. She felt a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing that her performance had created a shared experience that people would remember. As she closed the piano and returned to her duties, she noticed that the energy in the cafe had changed, subtly but unmistakably. There was a sense of connection, of anticipation, and of something extraordinary having occurred in an ordinary space. As she left the cafe that evening, the streets quiet with the fading light, she reflected on the events of the past 2 days. What had begun as a simple request had transformed into a series of experiences that touched not only her own life, but also the lives of others in ways she had not anticipated. The power of music, the courage to share her talent, and the openness of those around her had created something extraordinary from the ordinary. She walked home with a quiet joy, aware that her life had shifted in small but significant ways, and that the next chapter was just beginning, full of possibilities that she had never imagined. The following days brought a gentle whirlwind into her life. The cafe, which had always been a quiet, familiar space, now hummed with a subtle excitement. Regular customers greeted her with smiles and words of encouragement, and new visitors came specifically hoping to hear her play the piano. She moved through her work with a sense of calm confidence, carrying the music with her like a quiet companion. Each day, as she approached the piano, she felt a mixture of anticipation and comfort. Playing had become more than a brief performance. It was now a meaningful part of her daily life, a source of connection and joy. Local newspapers and online platforms began to feature her story. The video of her playing went viral, shared thousands of times across social media. She received messages from people she had never met, praising her talent, telling her how the music had touched their hearts. Some described listening to the recording late at night when they felt lonely, how it brought them peace. Others mentioned playing it in the background during family dinners, creating an atmosphere of warmth. She read each message quietly, often smiling, sometimes feeling tears rise at the sincerity of strangers moved by her music. It was overwhelming, but in a way that was deeply meaningful. Despite the attention, she remained grounded. The cafe was her home base, the place where she had started, and the place where she felt most comfortable. She continued to serve coffee, clear tables, and chat with customers as she always had, but there was now an added layer of connection. People saw her differently, not just as the person who took their orders, but as someone with a unique talent, someone who could touch hearts with a few notes from a piano. She felt the weight of responsibility lightly, understanding that the music had an impact and that she wanted to share it genuinely, without losing the authenticity that made it special. One afternoon, a small event organizer visited the cafe, introducing themselves politely and explaining that they were hosting a charity gathering for local families. They had seen the viral video and asked if she would consider performing. At first, she hesitated, unsure if stepping into a larger, more formal setting was something she was ready for. But the memory of the warmth and connection from her previous performances gave her courage. She agreed, quietly excited at the chance to share her music in a new way. The thought of being able to bring joy to more people, to create a shared moment of beauty beyond the cafe, felt meaningful and inspiring. Preparations for the event became a subtle part of her daily life. She spent a few quiet hours each evening at home, practicing new melodies and refining her touch on familiar pieces. It was not about perfection. It was about feeling the music, letting it flow naturally, and preparing to share it with an audience that would appreciate it. She found a delicate balance between her work at the cafe and her growing opportunities as a pianist. Each day was full but satisfying, a mixture of ordinary routines and extraordinary moments. She was learning to embrace change, to step into new experiences without fear, and to trust the beauty of her own abilities. The day of the charity event arrived. She arrived early, feeling a quiet mixture of nerves and excitement. The venue was simple but welcoming, filled with people of all ages. She set up at a small stage area, allowing herself a few moments to breathe, to center herself. When the music began, it flowed naturally, carrying the emotions she felt and sharing them with the audience. The reaction was immediate. People leaned in, listened intently, and responded with soft smiles and quiet nods. The connection she had experienced in the cafe now stretched into a larger space, touching more hearts, creating a shared experience that felt both personal and universal. Throughout the performance, she noticed the subtle ways in which people reacted. Some closed their eyes, letting the music guide their thoughts. Others held hands with friends or family members, sharing the moment in silence. She felt a profound sense of gratitude for the opportunity to create such an experience, to witness the quiet joy and emotion of others in response to something she had offered freely. The event continued for several pieces, each one flowing into the next, improvising slightly, letting the music respond to the energy in the room. It was a beautiful, unspoken conversation between her and the audience, a dialogue of feeling and presence. After the performance, people approached her to express their admiration. Some spoke quietly, almost shyly, while others offered heartfelt thanks for the emotions her music had evoked. She listened, feeling a deep sense of connection and humility. It was remarkable to realize that something so simple, a piano and the willingness to play, could create such meaningful experiences. She returned to her work at the cafe afterward, feeling both grounded and elevated, aware that her life had shifted in a way that was extraordinary yet deeply personal. The days that followed were filled with new opportunities. Invitations to perform at local community events, small concerts, and private gatherings arrived steadily. Each request was approached thoughtfully, with a desire to maintain authenticity and share music genuinely, rather than seek fame. She remained rooted in the cafe, in the work she loved, and in the small, meaningful routines that gave her life stability. Music had become a bridge, connecting her to others in ways she had never imagined, and she embraced it with humility and care. She often reflected on the journey from that first spontaneous request in the cafe to the present moment. The transformation was not about recognition or accolades, but about connection, courage, and the willingness to step into the unknown. She realized that life's most meaningful moments often arrived unexpectedly, in ordinary places, through simple acts of openness and creativity. The piano had become a symbol of that truth, a reminder that talent, when shared, could touch lives profoundly. Even as her days grew busier, she found time to practice, to explore new melodies, and to nurture the quiet joy that music brought her. She learned to balance attention and humility, understanding that her gift was not just for herself, but for those who could feel its impact. The cafe remained her anchor, the place where her journey had begun, and she returned to it each day with gratitude and a quiet sense of purpose. Life had changed, yes, but the essence of who she was and what she loved remained intact. As the evening light softened the cafe, she often sat at the piano for a few moments before closing. Her fingers danced lightly over the keys, not for an audience, but for herself, for the quiet satisfaction of creating something beautiful. The memories of reactions, smiles, and quiet moments of connection accompanied her, reminding her of the simple power of sharing one's gift. Music had become a part of her life in a way she had never expected, opening doors, touching hearts, and shaping experiences that were deeply personal and profoundly human. And so, each day, whether serving coffee, clearing tables, or sitting at the piano, she carried the knowledge that ordinary moments could lead to extraordinary experiences. The courage to play, to embrace the unknown, and to share a simple talent had transformed her life and the lives of those around her. She knew that more opportunities would come, more experiences would unfold, but the lessons remained clear: openness, authenticity, and the willingness to connect with others through what one loves could create a ripple effect far beyond what anyone could imagine. Life was no longer just ordinary. It was a series of small, beautiful moments, each one a chance to touch hearts, inspire, and celebrate the shared human experience.